Vance had meticulously engineered over 2 decades, a fortress built not of brick and mortar, but of discipline and deliberate anonymity. From the outside, her home office was unremarkable. A simple wooden desk, a worn leather chair, and shelves lined with well-thumbed books on structural engineering and urban planning. Nothing suggested that this was the nerve center of Ethelred Designs, a boutique architectural firm whose projects, sleek, sustainable, and subtly revolutionary, were reshaping skylines from Singapore to Seattle. Elara leaned back, the old leather of her chair groaning a familiar protest. She closed her eyes, letting the late afternoon sun warm her face. Her monthly income, the figure that would make most people gasp, was a number she rarely thought about, a digital abstraction in a Swiss bank account. It was a figure that consistently hovered above $60,000, a testament to her relentless work ethic and the genius of her late husband, whose foundational principles she had fiercely protected and expanded. Money, she often mused in her private thoughts, is merely a tool, a means to build, not a reason to boast. She had learned this lesson the hard way, growing up in a world where status was everything. But it was her husband, Arthur, a brilliant but deeply humble architect, who had solidified her philosophy. After his sudden death 15 years ago, Elara had taken the reins of their fledgling firm and steered it to global prominence, all while adhering to his core belief. True power resides in the quality of the work, not the volume of the noise. This philosophy was the reason for her life's great deception. To her son, Leo, she was simply Mom, the woman who left early for her office job, who drove a perfectly functional, decade-old sedan, and who lived in the same modest, 2-bedroom house they had bought when Leo was a child. She had never told him the truth. She had never shown him the blueprints for the colossal cultural center in Dubai that bore her firm's signature, nor the awards that sat locked away in a safe deposit box. Why the silence? Because she had seen what inherited wealth did to young men. It bred entitlement, dulled ambition, and created a dependency that was corrosive to the soul. She wanted Leo to be independent, to value hard work, and to build his own life from the ground up, just as she and Arthur had. She wanted him to be grounded, not gilded. But the silence, she knew, came at a cost. It allowed others to define her. It allowed others to pity her. And it allowed others to judge her. The ring of the phone shattered the quiet. It was Leo. His voice, when he spoke, was tight, strained, and laced with an anxiety that immediately put Elara on alert. "Mom, I need to ask you a huge favor. A really big one." Elara's internal alarm bells began to chime. Leo, at 32, was a mid-level manager at a logistics firm. A good man with a kind heart, but perpetually anxious about his standing in the world, especially since his engagement to Serena Blackwood. "What is it, Leo? You sound like you've lost a client." "Worse, Mom, it's Serena's parents, Victor and Martha. They're hosting their annual legacy gala this Saturday. It's a massive event. All the city's elite will be there. It's at the new Skyline Tower." Elara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The Skyline Tower, a monument to Victor Blackwood's aggressive, soulless development style, a building Elara's firm had publicly criticized for its unsustainable design. "And they've invited me?" Elara asked, her voice flat. "Yes," they insisted. They said they couldn't possibly host a family event without meeting the mother of their future son-in-law. "But Mom," Leo hesitated, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "I need to be honest with you. I need you to understand the situation." "I'm listening, son." They have a certain expectation, a certain image. They're very big on appearances, on legacy. And when they asked about you, Leo stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame. "I told them you were a freelance draftsman, that you work from home, that you live a very quiet, simple life. I didn't want them to think you were a burden." The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Simple, quiet, burden. Elara felt a familiar, cold rage begin to stir. It wasn't the rage of a wounded ego, but the controlled fury of an architect whose carefully laid foundation had been undermined. Leo, in his desperate need for acceptance, had reduced her entire life, her hard work, her principles, her success, to a pathetic apology. "So they know nothing of Ethelred designs?" Elara asked, her voice dangerously calm. "No, God, no, Mom. Victor would. He'd have a fit. He's obsessed with the firm that's blocking his new project. He calls them old-school idealists. Just, please, Mom, can you just be the quiet mom for one night? Just blend in. Please don't embarrass me." Elara took a deep, steadying breath. The plan, already nascent in her mind, solidified into a sharp, clear blueprint. "Okay, Leo," she said, her voice soft, almost timid. "I'll be there, and I promise I will give them exactly what they expect to see." She hung up the phone and looked around her office. The worn chair, the simple desk, the quiet sunbeam. She was going to give them the performance of a lifetime. She was going to become the poor, naive mother they had already written into their script. She wanted to see, firsthand, the true nature of the people who were about to become family. The week passed in a blur of international conference calls and high-stakes design reviews, all conducted from the quiet anonymity of her home office. But the upcoming gala was a parallel project, a meticulous exercise in role-playing. Elara approached her wardrobe with the precision of a surgeon. She needed an outfit that screamed unremarkable, that whispered struggle, but that was still impeccably clean, a nod to her inherent dignity. She settled on a dress she hadn't worn in years. A charcoal gray, shapeless linen shift bought from a thrift store during a brief, experimental phase of extreme minimalism. It was clean, but the fabric was tired, the cut utterly forgettable. For shoes, she chose a pair of scuffed, low-heeled leather pumps that had seen countless miles of city pavement. She looked at her jewelry box. Inside lay a small, velvet pouch. She opened it, revealing a single, exquisite piece, a pendant crafted from polished titanium and rose gold, shaped like a perfect, miniature architectural truss. It was a gift from Arthur, a symbol of their firm and their life together. It was worth more than the Blackwoods' entire collection of costume jewelry. She picked it up, the cool metal familiar in her palm, and then, with a decisive click, she placed it back in the safe. This night was about absence, about what she didn't have. The pendant would stay behind. Instead, she chose a simple, silver wedding band, the only piece of jewelry she ever wore. It was a silent reminder of the values she was defending. As she pulled her hair back into a severe, unadorned bun, she caught her reflection. The woman staring back was tired, slightly overwhelmed, and utterly harmless. Perfect. But a memory surfaced, sharp and cold, fueling her resolve. It was 10 years ago, at a small, local planning meeting. She had been arguing passionately for a community park design when Victor Blackwood, then merely a rising star in development, had cut her off mid-sentence. "Look, lady," he'd sneered, not even bothering to learn her name, "this is business. This is about capital. Leave the idealistic sketches to the amateurs and the hobbyists." The memory was a bitter tonic. He had dismissed her then. Tonight, she would let him dismiss her again, but this time, the dismissal would be a weapon. The journey was an exercise in sensory contrast. Elara took the city bus. The rumble of the engine and the smell of stale exhaust a stark counterpoint to the perfumed air and hushed luxury awaiting her. She watched the city lights blur past, a silent observer of the world she had built but rarely inhabited. The Skyline Tower was a glass and steel monolith, cold and arrogant, dominating the financial district. The gala was held in the penthouse ballroom, a space designed to intimidate with its sheer scale and dizzying views. As she stepped out of the taxi, a small, necessary indulgence, She was immediately struck by the scene. A parade of black cars, a velvet rope, and a doorman in white gloves who eyed her with a practiced, dismissive glance. She walked in, feeling the weight of 100 judging eyes. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of power. Leo spotted her first. His face, already pale with anxiety, drained further. He looked her up and down, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief that she had come and horror at her chosen attire. "Mom," he whispered, rushing over, his tuxedo a stark contrast to her faded linen. "You're here." "I promised, didn't I?" she replied, offering the timid, slightly overwhelmed smile she had practiced. Serena glided over, immaculate in a custom-made gown. Her greeting was a quick, cold peck on the cheek. Her eyes, however, lingered on the scuffed pumps. "Eleonora, so glad you could make it," Serena said, her voice strained. "Mom and Dad are over there. They're waiting." The Blackwoods were holding court near a massive, floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Victor, a man whose tailored suit looked like a second skin, exuded an aura of unshakable authority. Martha, draped in diamonds and a gown that cost more than Elara's annual mortgage payments, was the picture of socialite perfection. Leo made the introduction, his voice cracking slightly. "Dad, Mom, this is my mother, Elara Vance." Martha Blackwood looked up. Her gaze was not one of curiosity, but of immediate surgical assessment. It swept over Elara's tired dress, her simple hair, and her worn shoes. In that instant, Elara saw it all: the judgment, the disdain, the profound disappointment. She was not a person, she was a problem. Martha extended a hand, a cold, limp gesture. "A pleasure, Elara. Such a long journey, I'm sure." Victor merely offered a curt nod, his eyes already drifting past her to a more important guest. Elara was placed at a small, peripheral table, a satellite orbiting the Blackwood sun. She was a second-class guest, an inconvenient truth to be tolerated. No one offered her a drink. No one asked if she was comfortable. The performance had begun. And Elara, the architect of her own fate, settled in to observe the structural flaws of her adversaries. She was invisible, she was harmless. And that, she knew, was the most dangerous position of all. The first hour of the gala was a masterclass in social exclusion. Elara was not ignored, she was actively, deliberately minimized. The Blackwoods, with their practiced social grace, managed to speak around her, their conversations forming an impenetrable, gilded wall. Martha Blackwood, after a lengthy discussion about her recent trip to the Italian Riviera, finally turned her attention to Elara, her expression a mask of feigned, pitying concern. "Elara, dear," Martha began, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the small circle of guests around them. "Leo tells us you're a writer. A draftsman, is that right? Such a noble pursuit. So much passion." Elara offered her timid smile. "I work in design, yes, mostly residential plans now." "Residential," Martha repeated, drawing out the word as if it were a minor ailment. "How quaint. You know, Victor and I have just finalized the plans for our new summer home in Aspen. It's a marvel, really. The architect is a protege of that firm. What was it, Victor? Ethelred Designs?" Victor, who had been discussing the fluctuating price of gold with a man in a bespoke suit, nodded curtly. "Ethelred? Yes, overpriced idealists, but they do good work. We had to compromise on the materials, of course. Their insistence on sustainable, locally sourced timber was a nightmare for the budget. But one must indulge the artists, I suppose." Elara felt a slow burn of professional indignation. Compromise? The Aspen project was a notorious example of a developer gutting Ethelred's core design principles for a marginal cost saving. "It sounds challenging," Elara offered, keeping her voice small. Martha sighed dramatically. "Oh, the challenges of wealth, Elara, they are constant. The maintenance alone, We have properties in 3 countries, and keeping track of the staff, the taxes, the upkeep. It's a full-time job. I often wonder how people manage with less. With your freelance work. Is it enough to cover the utilities these days? I hear electricity prices are simply dreadful. The question was a direct, calculated blow, delivered with the sweetness of a poisoned candy. It wasn't a question about her finances. It was a statement about her perceived inadequacy. I manage, Elara replied, lowering her gaze slightly, playing the role of the humble supplicant. I save where I can. I don't need much. Oh, Elara, you are so brave, Martha cooed, placing a cold, diamond-heavy hand on Elara's arm. Truly, I admire women who struggle alone. Although, of course, one always wishes to give our children more, to give them a better start. But, well, everyone gives what they can. There it was, the core insult. She was an insufficient mother. She hadn't provided Leo with the gilded path the Blackwoods had provided Serena. Leo, standing nearby, looked down at his shoes, his jaw clenched in silent shame. Elara forced a tiny, pathetic smile. Yes, you're right. Everyone gives what they can. Victor, sensing the conversation was becoming too personal for the public eye, stepped in, steering the topic back to his favorite subject, himself. He launched into a lengthy, detailed monologue about the Skyline Tower itself, the very building they were standing in. As a draftsman, you must appreciate the engineering, he said, his tone patronizing. The sheer scale of the structural steel required to achieve this cantilevered design. It's complex work, far beyond the scope of residential plans. Elara saw her opening. She had designed the structural steel for 3 buildings taller than the Skyline Tower. She knew the flaws in Victor's design, the shortcuts he had taken, the compromises that would cost millions in maintenance down the line. The cantilever is impressive, Mr. Blackwood, Elara said, her voice soft but precise. But I noticed the sheer wall placement on the north face. It seems to create a significant torsional load on the core during high wind events. Did your engineers compensate for the dynamic wind pressure on the upper third, or did you rely solely on a static analysis? A sudden, uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Victor Blackwood blinked, momentarily stunned. The question was too technical, too specific, too competent for the freelance draftsman he had imagined. My engineers are the best in the city, Elara, Victor snapped, recovering quickly. We compensated for everything. Don't worry your pretty little head about the structural integrity of a billion-dollar project. Stick to your residential plans. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, turning back to the man in the bespoke suit, his face flushed with annoyance. Elara had momentarily broken the script, and Victor was visibly irritated. She retreated, her heart pounding, but a small, cold satisfaction settling in her chest. She had tested the structure, and it had cracked. The gala continued, the air growing heavier with the clinking of glasses and the relentless drone of self-congratulation. Elara watched from her corner, a silent observer. Leo was trying desperately to engage with Serena's friends, but his anxiety was palpable. Then, Victor Blackwood pulled Leo aside, moving them close to Elara's table, seemingly forgetting she was even there. Leo, Victor began, his voice low and conspiratorial, I need to talk to you about a problem. A major headache that's holding up the Olympus project, the one that will make you a partner, son. Leo's eyes lit up. The Olympus project? What's the issue, sir? It's an architectural firm. A small, boutique outfit called Ethelred Designs. Victor spat the name out like a bad taste. They own the intellectual property, rights to the adjacent land's historical zoning, and they are refusing to sell or compromise on their design principles. They are blocking my entire development. Elara froze, her entire body rigid. Ethelred Designs. The irony was a physical weight pressing down on her. They're a pain in my side, Victor continued, oblivious. Their owner is some old-school idealist. She's financially naive, I hear. She thinks her legacy is worth more than a nine-figure buyout. It's ridiculous. Victor leaned closer to Leo, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I need to buy her out. I need to crush her. I've sent my people to negotiate, but she's stubborn. I need to find her weakness. She's a woman, Leo. She must have a weakness. Maybe she has a sick relative, maybe she's secretly in debt. I need you to use your connections, your youth to find a vulnerability. We need to buy out the stubborn owner and proceed. Leo looked horrified. Sir, I don't know anyone in that world. Find someone, Victor hissed. Your future depends on it. This woman, this Elara Vance, the owner of Ethelred, is an obstacle, an old-school idealist who needs to be removed. Elara listened, her internal monologue a raging storm of cold fury. She is the obstacle. She is the old-school idealist. She is the woman you are trying to crush. Victor Blackwood was not just a snob, he was a predator. He was actively planning to destroy her firm, her legacy, and the values she had spent a lifetime protecting. And he was doing it right next to her son, promising him a partnership in exchange for finding the weakness of the very woman who was his mother. The performance was over. The test was complete. Elara had come to see the Blackwoods' true faces, and the view was uglier than she could have imagined. The time for silence was past. The time for the final, devastating structural failure was at hand. The air in the ballroom seemed to thicken, the celebratory chatter fading into a dull roar in Elara's ears. Victor Blackwood's words, old-school idealist who needs to be removed, echoed with a chilling clarity. The man was not just a snob. He was a corporate predator, and his prey was Elara Vance, the woman sitting 5 feet away. A few minutes later, Serena approached Elara, her face a careful blend of discomfort and forced sincerity. She gently took Elara's arm and led her toward a quiet alcove near the window, where Victor was waiting. Mom, Dad, and I wanted to have a private chat with you, Serena began, her voice low and rehearsed. Victor cut to the chase, his expression shifting into one of practiced, paternal concern. He was playing the role of the benevolent patriarch, a performance Elara found utterly repulsive. Elara, Victor began, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a claim of ownership than comfort. We are family now, and as family, we have a responsibility to look out for each other, especially for Leo. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Elara kept her face blank, her eyes wide and slightly timid, the perfect picture of a woman about to receive bad news she was too fragile to handle. Leo is a good boy, Victor continued, but he's a worrier. He worries about his career, about his future with Serena, and frankly, he worries about you. Living alone, working freelance, it's a constant stressor for him, and we don't want that stress to bleed into their marriage. Serena nodded earnestly. It's true, Elara. Leo is so focused on making sure you're okay, he's distracted from his own potential. We want him to focus on the partnership track at the firm, and that requires absolute focus. Unnecessary burdens. The phrase hung unspoken in the air, a ghost of the original insult. We believe in stability, Victor declared, his voice booming slightly despite the attempt at privacy. Financial stability, emotional stability. And Elara, we have to be honest. Your current situation, it's a risk. It's a vulnerability that Leo feels he has to manage. Elara's internal monologue was a torrent of ice. My situation is a net worth that could buy your entire development firm, Victor. My vulnerability is the only thing keeping you from being exposed right now. That's why Martha and I have discussed a solution, Victor said, leaning in, his breath smelling faintly of expensive scotch. We want to help, not as charity, but as an investment in Leo and Serena's future peace of mind. He pulled a crisp, white envelope from his inner jacket pocket. It was thick, clearly containing more than just a letter. "We've identified a lovely, small condo development on the outskirts of the city," Victor explained, his tone becoming purely transactional. "It's modest, but safe. We would purchase it outright for you. And in addition, we would provide a monthly stipend of $2,000. Elara widened her eyes, feigning shock. The original story's bribe was $700. Victor Blackwood's offer was larger, but the insult was exponentially greater. $2,000, Elara whispered, her voice trembling slightly. That's very generous." "It is," Victor confirmed, his chest puffing out slightly. "It would allow you to stop worrying about the freelance work. You could focus on your hobbies, live comfortably. But there is one small condition, Elara, a necessary condition." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes boring into hers, waiting for the inevitable moment of submission. "We would ask you to respect Leo and Serena's space, to limit your contact, to give them the freedom to build their life together without interference. Essentially, we need you to stop being an active part of Leo's daily life. We need you to stop being a distraction." The word distraction was the final, crushing blow. They weren't just buying her off, they were trying to erase her existence from her son's life. Leo, who had been hovering nervously, finally heard the full extent of the offer. His face went ashen. "Dad, Serena, what are you saying? You can't ask her to—" "Leo, silence," Victor snapped, his veneer of benevolence cracking. "This is a business decision for your future. Your mother understands, don't you, Elara?" Elara looked at the envelope, then at Victor's arrogant, expectant face. She looked at Serena, whose eyes were fixed on the floor in shame. And finally, she looked at Leo, whose face was a mask of betrayal and helplessness. She took a deep, slow breath, letting the silence stretch. The moment was hers. She was about to accept the envelope to complete the performance when a voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the noise of the gala. Victor Blackwood, I've been looking for you." A man was striding purposefully toward their alcove. He was Mr. Chen, a rival developer from Shanghai, a man known for his immense wealth and his uncompromising taste. He was a figure of global finance, and Victor Blackwood instantly snapped to attention, his bribe forgotten. "Mr. Chen, what a surprise. I didn't know you were attending my little gala," Victor stammered, his voice suddenly oily and deferential. Mr. Chen ignored Victor, his eyes fixed on Elara. He stopped directly in front of her, his expression one of profound confusion, then immediate, intense respect. "Madam Vance," Mr. Chen said, bowing slightly, a gesture of respect Victor Blackwood would never receive. "I apologize. I did not recognize you out of your usual attire. I was told you were not attending. I need your final approval on the Shanghai Tower schematics. My team is waiting for the green light." The air froze. Victor Blackwood's jaw dropped. Serena gasped, covering her mouth. Leo looked from Mr. Chen to his mother, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization. Elara slowly, deliberately, stood up. The timid, apologetic mask shattered, replaced by the cold, controlled authority of a woman who commanded respect on a global scale. She did not raise her voice. She simply let the volume of her presence fill the space. "Mr. Blackwood," Elara said, her voice clear and cutting, "I believe you were just making me an offer." Victor could only stammer, Madam Vance. I don't understand. Who are you?" Elara reached into the pocket of her worn linen dress. She did not pull out a credit card or a key. She pulled out the titanium and rose gold architectural pendant, the miniature truss, and held it up, letting the ballroom lights catch its intricate, perfect design. "I am Elara Vance," she stated, her voice a whip crack of finality. "I am the owner and chief architect of Ethelred Designs." She let the name hang in the air, watching the color drain from Victor's face. "And you, Victor," she continued, stepping closer, forcing him to take a step back. "You were just discussing the old-school idealist who is blocking your Olympus project. You were just offering to buy off the financially naive owner of Ethelred Designs." She dropped the bribe envelope onto the floor at his feet. "You see, Victor, you didn't just try to buy off my son's mother. You tried to buy off the woman who holds the intellectual property, rights to the very land you need. You tried to buy off the woman whose firm's reputation is the only thing keeping your shoddy construction practices from being exposed." She turned to Mr. Chen. "Mr. Chen, I apologize for the delay. The Shanghai schematics are approved. I will email the final sign-off tonight. And as for the Olympus project, Victor Blackwood," she turned back to him, her eyes cold and hard, "I have reviewed your plans. They are structurally unsound, environmentally irresponsible, and architecturally bankrupt. Ethelred Designs will not sell the land. We will not compromise, and we will not allow your project to proceed." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint, distant sound of the city below. The Blackwoods were exposed, humiliated, and utterly defeated. Victor Blackwood was a man accustomed to control, to command, to crushing opposition with a single, well-placed phone call. But now, he was reduced to a sputtering, red-faced caricature of his former self. "This is outrageous," he finally managed to roar, his voice cracking with humiliation. "This is a setup. You lied. You came here under false pretenses." Elara turned her full attention to him, her expression softening slightly, but only to convey a deep, abiding pity. "I gave you the opportunity to show me who you were, Victor," she said, her voice quiet but carrying immense weight. "I presented myself as a woman of modest means, and you responded with contempt, with dismissal, and finally, with a bribe to remove me from my son's life. I didn't lie about my values, I simply exposed the hollowness of yours." Martha Blackwood, her face a mask of horrified disbelief, finally found her voice. "Serena, you knew about this? You brought this deception into our home?" Serena, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing horror and a strange, dawning respect for Elara, finally stepped forward. She looked at her father, then at her mother, and a lifetime of living under their suffocating expectations seemed to break free. "No, Mom, I didn't know," Serena said, her voice trembling but firm. "But I saw what you did. I saw how you treated her. You didn't just try to buy her off, you tried to buy Leo's loyalty. You tried to control our marriage before it even began." She turned to Elara, her eyes filled with tears. "Elara, I am so sorry. I never knew." Leo, who had been standing frozen, finally moved. He walked past his fiancée, past the stunned Mr. Chen, and stood directly in front of his mother. He looked at the architectural pendant in her hand, then at her face, and the pieces of his life finally clicked into place. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Ethelred Designs, all this time, why?" He wrapped his arms around her, a tight, desperate hug that spoke volumes of his shame and his love. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you. I'm sorry I let them make me feel ashamed of you." "You have nothing to apologize for, son," Elara murmured, holding him close. "You were just caught in a poorly designed structure. Now you are free to walk away." She pulled back, her gaze sweeping over the Blackwoods one last time. Victor was already being pulled away by a frantic Martha, whispering threats and promises of legal action. Elara turned to Mr. Chen, who was watching the scene with a look of profound satisfaction. "Mr. Chen," Elara said, her professional voice returning, "the Shanghai schematics are approved, and as for the Olympus project, I believe I have made my position clear. My firm's legacy is not for sale." Mr. Chen nodded, a deep, respectful bow. "Madam Vance, it is an honor to work with a woman of such integrity. The world needs more architects like you." Elara offered a final, dignified nod, picked up her worn, linen handbag, and walked toward the exit. She did not look back. She had done what she came to do. She had exposed the rot in the foundation and protected her son's future. The journey home was quiet. Elara sat in the back of the taxi, the city lights a blur of color. The Skyline Tower, once a symbol of Victor Blackwood's arrogance, now seemed diminished, a hollow shell against the vast night sky. She pulled out her phone and sent a brief text to Leo. "I'm home. I love you." His reply was immediate. "I love you too, Mom. Thank you for everything." The taxi pulled up to her modest, familiar house. She paid the driver, who, like the doorman, barely gave her a second glance. She walked up the familiar path, the scuffed leather of her shoes making a soft, comforting sound on the pavement. Inside, the house was dark, silent, and safe. She went straight to her office, the room that was both her sanctuary and her empire. She sat down at her simple wooden desk, the leather chair groaning its welcome. She looked at the architectural pendant, the titanium truss, lying on the desk. It was a symbol of her success, her integrity, and her late husband's enduring values. She began her final internal monologue, a quiet reflection on the night's events. The secret is out. The silence is broken, but the truth has set Leo free. I kept the truth from him to protect him from the corruption of easy wealth. I wanted him to build his own character, his own foundation, without the structural support of my money. Tonight, he chose character over comfort. He chose integrity over inheritance. Victor Blackwood saw me as an obstacle to be removed. He saw me as a poor, naive woman whose life could be bought and whose son's future could be controlled. He failed to understand that the true strength of a structure is not in its height, but in the integrity of its foundation. I could have built a mansion. I could have driven a sports car. I could have worn diamonds that rivaled Martha's. But those things are just facades. They are not the architecture of a well-lived life. My life is built on the principles Arthur and I shared: sustainability, integrity, and purpose. My wealth is a tool to build better buildings, not a trophy to flaunt at a gala. Elara picked up the pendant, the cool metal a comforting weight in her hand. She looked at the framed photo of Arthur on her desk, his kind, intelligent eyes smiling back at her. She smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached her eyes. She had won the battle not with money, but with integrity. The foundation was sound. The legacy was secure. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet suburban street. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but the light in her own home, the light of her own truth, was the brightest of all. Voiceover conclusion. They say that architecture is the art of planning and constructing buildings, but I believe it is the art of planning and constructing a life. And tonight, I didn't just save a building from a bad developer. I saved my son's life.